The shop, Harper's Antiques and Oddities, was more like a forgotten world than a store. It was a maze of shadows, with objects stacked haphazardly and the faint scent of stale air and dust thick in every corner. Everything about it felt off. The shelves creaked under the weight of old trinkets, the dim light cast eerie shadows over the relics, and the air seemed to hold whispers from the past, whispers only I could hear. To the people in town, it was just a curiosity shop, a place for bored souls to wander through and waste an afternoon. But for me, it was a treasure trove, a Pandora's box I could never quite stop opening. Mr. Harper, the shop's owner, was a strange man. He was in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had lived 1,000 lifetimes. His hair was thin and silver, his clothes perpetually worn out. I often wondered how someone could become so absorbed in a life of antiquities, until I realized he wasn't just an antique dealer. He was an artifact, buried under the weight of 1,000 stories that never saw the light of day. There were rumors about him. People said he was mad, that he locked away dark secrets in that shop. Most of the time, I ignored the gossip, but sometimes, when I caught his eye, I saw something in him, something that made my skin crawl and my curiosity grow even more. Mr. Harper wasn't just a man who dealt in dust and nostalgia. He knew things. He had to. "You want to understand history?" he'd say, his voice gravelly and low, like it came from the bottom of some forgotten well. "It's not in the textbooks, Alex. It's in the things we bury, the things we shove into dark corners and hope no one ever finds." I spent hours at the shop after school, hanging on his every word, my eyes roving over the oddities he showed me. But there was one place I wasn't allowed to go, the back room. It was always locked, hidden behind a thick velvet curtain that reeked of mildew. But it wasn't the locked door that intrigued me. It was the way Mr. Harper reacted whenever it was mentioned. His face would harden, his jaw clench, and he'd mutter something under his breath before quickly changing the subject. "Don't go in there," he told me once, the warning not just in his words but in his eyes. "Some things are better left alone, Alex. Trust me." But I didn't trust him. No one told me what I could and couldn't do. Not anymore. One dreary afternoon, when a steady rain pounded against the windows and Mr. Harper was busy talking to a regular, I saw my chance. I had spent too many hours staring at that damned curtain, wondering what lay behind it. I had to know. My heart hammered in my chest as I moved quickly, slipping past the counter and the distracted shopkeeper. I pulled aside the curtain, which smelled of dust and something else, something sour, like decay. The back room was even darker than the rest of the shop. The air felt thick, oppressive, like I was walking into the belly of some ancient creature. My breath hitched as I looked around. The room was a cluttered mess, piled high with boxes and crates, all filled with objects that had been forgotten by time. The walls were covered with thick webs, and the floor creaked under my weight. But then I saw it. There, half buried under a pile of rotting cloth, was a massive book. Its cover was cracked and warped, the leather aged to a nearly unrecognizable state. My pulse raced as I approached it. My fingers trembled as I brushed the dust off the cover, the weight of its presence sinking into my bones. This wasn't just any book. This was something else entirely. The spine cracked loudly as I pried it open. The pages were yellowed with age, curling at the edges like the petals of a dying flower. The writing was unlike anything I had ever seen, letters twisted and contorted in ways that defied reason. I felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic force, urging me to turn the pages. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something darker. Something hungry. I didn't even hear him come in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Mr. Harper's voice snapped me out of my trance. It was like a slap to the face, brutal and cold. I jumped back, the book slipping from my hands and crashing to the floor with a dull thud. His face was livid, red with fury. "I told you not to come in here!" he roared, his eyes wild with something I couldn't quite place, fear maybe? Or something worse. I just wanted to see. My voice was a strangled whisper. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to explain. I wasn't even sure I understood what was happening to me. But he wasn't listening. He moved toward me like a predator closing in on its prey, his hands shaking as he picked up the book. This is why I told you to stay away. You have no idea what you've just unleashed. You have no right to touch that. Mr. Harper's voice trembled with fury as he snatched the book from the floor, cradling it against his chest like a fragile relic, though I could see the way his hands shook, as if he feared the book might slip away and disappear forever. His eyes, wild with panic, locked onto mine. Get out. Now. And don't ever set foot in here again. Some things are meant to stay hidden, Alex. You have no idea what you're messing with. I didn't argue. There was no point. His anger was palpable, suffocating. It was clear this was no ordinary book, no ordinary shop. My curiosity had opened a door to something I wasn't ready for. I bolted. The last thing I heard was Mr. Harper's muttered curses, trailing behind me as I ran out into the cold, rainy street. That moment haunted me. I couldn't forget the way his eyes had burned with that unspoken warning. For years, the memory of that forbidden book gnawed at me, a secret I couldn't shake. As time passed, my obsession with the unknown only grew. I went on to study archaeology, immersing myself in the study of medieval manuscripts. By the time I was nearing my master's degree, I could read Middle English without effort, translating texts that would make most of my peers' heads spin. But no matter how deep I dove into the past, the thought of that mysterious book from Mr. Harper's shop stayed with me, always in the back of my mind, like an itch I could never quite scratch. I was nearing the final stages of my studies when I realized that for my thesis, I needed an authentic medieval manuscript to translate. It had to be something that hadn't been touched by modern scholarship, something raw and untouched. And that's when the memory of the book resurfaced, burning brighter than ever. I had to find it. So, I did what anyone would do. I returned home. It had been nearly 10 years since I'd left my small hometown behind. The town had changed in subtle ways, stores had closed, new ones had opened, but Clarkston's Curiosities was still there, though it looked worn down by the years. The faded paint on the sign, the cloudy windows that seemed to obscure the world inside. It felt different, older. The scent of dust was thicker than I remembered, the air more oppressive. When I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled softly, its sound sending a chill down my spine. Mr. Harper looked up from behind the counter, his features even more weathered than before. His hair had grayed completely, and his back was more hunched. But his eyes, those eyes, still had that same sharp gleam, the same unsettling awareness as when I was a child. Back again, huh? He muttered, his voice raspier, his movements slower. Didn't think I'd see you around these parts after all these years. I'm finishing my degree, I said casually, pretending like nothing had changed. Thought I'd swing by for old time's sake. He nodded, his expression unreadable, his gaze lingering on me a bit too long. Not much has changed here. Same old junk. I made small talk with him, asking about various items scattered across the shop. I knew the layout by heart, but I couldn't afford to draw his attention too much. Subtly, I steered the conversation toward the front of the shop, asking about some old globe that had always fascinated me. As he shuffled off to retrieve it, I saw my opportunity. Without hesitation, I slipped behind the dusty curtain into the back room. The space hadn't changed. The clutter, the darkness, the suffocating air, it was all exactly as I remembered. My heart raced in my chest as I scanned the room. There it was. The book. Still half buried beneath a pile of ragged cloth. Still as ominous as ever. It felt heavier this time, as though the years had imbued it with a darker presence. The leather cover was cracked, its texture cold and unwelcoming. Without a moment's hesitation, I seized it. I shoved it into my bag, praying Mr. Harper wouldn't notice, and made my way back to the front of the store. Thanks for the chat, Mr. Harper, I said as casually as I could manage, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'll drop by again sometime. He only muttered something incoherent, his narrowed eyes following me with a suspicious gaze. But he didn't say anything. I left the shop, heart pounding, knowing I had what I came for. That night, in the quiet of my dorm room, I finally opened the book. The dim light from my desk lamp flickered as I turned the brittle pages. The ink, though faded, was still legible. As I began to decipher the words, I felt a strange sense of recognition. It wasn't gibberish. It wasn't some ancient code. No, it was Middle English, a language I had mastered over the years. And then I read the first line. I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't just any text. It was something else, something older, more dangerous. A part of me should have closed the book then and there, but the rest of me was already too far gone, too deep into it. I couldn't stop. Here is what the text said. Anno Domini 1347. I write this now as the last of the leaves fall, their golden and crimson hues swirling through the air, promising the arrival of a bitter winter. The world feels calm, as it always does during autumn, when the harvest has been gathered, and the granaries are full, ready to weather the cold months. Our kingdom flourishes under King Edward III, although I have never set eyes on him. His name is spoken with awe and admiration across the land, and they say his court is a spectacle of opulence, where knights dressed in gleaming armor bow before him and poets recite verses amidst halls that glimmer with gold. Even in our little village of Ainsworth, we can feel the warmth of his rule. Taxes are just, the roads are safe, and the market is alive with traders bringing spices and silks from foreign lands. Ainsworth is no grand city, just a scattering of cottages nestled in a valley surrounded by hills that rise like giants in the distance. But it's home. The soil here is rich with barley, and the river runs swift and cold, cutting through the land like a silver thread. The villagers are more like family than neighbors, always ready to help one another, whether it's sharing a meal or lending a hand in a time of need. My family's cottage is small but sturdy, with a thatched roof and a garden where my mother tends to her herbs. She believes in their power, thyme, lavender, and rosemary, which she swears will keep illness away. My father is a carpenter, his hands rough and callous from years of shaping wood into tools, tables, and wagons. He speaks little, but his presence is solid and dependable, like the oak beams that hold our cottage together. Then there's my sister, Cecily. At 12 years old, she's a whirlwind of energy, always running barefoot through the village or climbing trees with the other children, laughing louder than anyone else. My days are simple but full of joy. I rise early to tend to the sheep and gather firewood. By midday, when the sun is high and the air is warm, I join my friends. Henry, the baker's son, is always sneaking pastries from his father's kitchen, stuffing his pockets until they bulge. Thomas dreams of becoming a knight, though the only sword he possesses is a stick he carved from a tree. The afternoons are spent in mischief, exploring the hills, racing through the meadows, or skipping stones across the river. On Sundays, we gather in the village square, where minstrels play their songs, filling the air with tales of valor, love, and adventure. But the brightest part of my world is Eleanor. She is the miller's daughter, with hair like sun-bleached straw and eyes the color of spring's first shoots. We've known each other since we were children, and it has always been understood that we will marry. There is no other choice, and I would have it no other way. Her laugh rings out like music, and when she looks at me, I feel as though the rest of the world vanishes. We spend hours walking together, talking about the future we'll build, a cottage of our own, where she will tend to her flowers and I will work on my craft as a carpenter. You'll be the finest carpenter in Ainsworth, she told me yesterday, her face rosy from the chill in the air. And I'll bake bread that will make the king himself envy it. Only if the king has teeth like a goat, I teased, earning a playful slap on the arm. The future seems as bright as the harvest moon. The village is buzzing with preparations for the winter festival, a time for feasting, dancing, and merrymaking. The air is thick with the scent of roasting chestnuts, and the clinking of mugs filled with spiced cider fills the streets. The church bells ring out, joyful and loud. The monks from the abbey arrived with news of King Edward's victory in France. The villagers cheered and clapped as the priest spoke of our army's triumph, and even he cracked a rare smile as he blessed the crowd. I often think these are the best days of my life. There's no fear here, no sense of dread or shadow over our hearts. We work hard, laugh harder, and dream of the days to come. I'm 16 now, almost a man. My father says that soon I'll take over his workshop, and Eleanor's father has already begun making the furniture for our future home. It feels as though everything is falling into place, like nothing could ever disturb the peaceful happiness we know. November. The air grows colder with each passing day, but life in Ainsworth continues, as it always has. The harvest is in, the fires are lit, and the hearths crackle with warmth as we prepare for the coming winter. The only shadow that hangs over our village is the murmurs of a strange sickness sweeping through distant towns. Henry was the first to mention it after his trip to the market in the next village. They say an illness is spreading, he told me as we sat by the river, the sound of the water rushing past us. It comes with the rats. People get sick, grow boils, and die in a matter of days. Rats. They've always been a problem, scurrying through our fields and barns, gnawing at the grain, their eyes gleaming in the dark corners of the village. But what makes this different? Stories, Thomas scoffed, sharpening his stick sword against a rock. Frightened fools love to make up tales to pass the time. I agreed with him. What sickness could possibly reach us here, in our secluded valley? We were safe, hidden away from the troubles of the world. I pushed the thought from my mind and turned my attention back to my family and to Eleanor, the only things in this world that mattered. December 4th. It all started with Widow Hargrove. She had always been fragile, her face a maze of deep wrinkles, her back hunched like an old tree. When she fell ill, no one thought much of it. Winter takes the old, as my father always says. But then the boils appeared, black and swollen, bursting beneath her skin, releasing a putrid, foul-smelling pus. Her cough grew wet and labored, and within 3 days she was dead. The village buried her quietly, as though it was just another part of the cycle of life. The earth swallowed her, and we went on with ours. Next, it was the miller's son and his bride. They had only been married for a few months, their laughter still echoing in the village square. Eleanor and I had danced at their wedding, sharing in their joy. Now they lay side by side in their cottage, their bodies contorted in agony, their faces barely recognizable under the black, swollen boils. Father Donnelly performed a quick blessing over them, his voice shaking as if he himself were losing faith. Deus nos punire peccatus nostris, he murmured. God is punishing us for our sins. He urged the villagers to gather in the church to repent, his words laced with fear. December 7th. It was impossible to ignore the rats any longer. They were everywhere, scurrying boldly through the streets in broad daylight, their red eyes gleaming like embers. Eleanor had seen them in the mill, gnawing at the grain sacks. Don't touch them, my father warned, his tone sharp. They carry filth. But by then, it was too late. The Thompsons, our neighbors, were the next to fall. Their youngest daughter came running to me in the street, clutching my tunic in desperation. They're burning, she sobbed, her voice hoarse with panic. They're burning up. I dared to enter their home, but immediately regretted it. The stench of decay hit me like a wave, sweat, blood, and death. Mr. Thompson lay convulsing on the floor, his body racked with tremors, while his wife sat slumped in a chair, her face hidden beneath her hands. The black boils had spread across her arms, her flesh cracked and oozing. It was a nightmare come to life. December 15th. I write now with trembling hands. My mother and Cecily have fallen ill. It started with a fever, their faces burning with heat, and their bodies growing weak to the touch. Then came the boils, black, horrific lumps that sprouted across their skin like weeds. My sister barely speaks now, her voice a whisper, and my mother has become delirious, calling out to my father, to God, as if they might somehow save her. The worst part is the coughing. It's deep and wet, a rattling sound that tears at their fragile bodies, as though it could break them apart. Blood drips from their lips in dark, sticky rivulets. I sit beside their beds, holding their hands, praying that somehow they will recover. But in my heart I know the truth. The plague has come to Ainsworth, and it will not leave until it has claimed us all. December 20th. The bells of the church ring ceaselessly now, day and night, calling the villagers to repentance. Father Edmund stands at the altar, his robes stained with the blood of the dying as he begs us to seek God's forgiveness. Veniad Deum, quia nos punient peccata nostra. Come to God, for he punishes us for our sins. His voice cracks with despair as the villagers, desperate and frightened, pack into the church. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the scent of fear. Some wail and scream, others tear their clothes, and a few flagellate themselves with whips, believing that their suffering will appease God. But the plague does not care for prayers. The streets are eerily quiet now. The only sound is the cries of the dying and the soft, constant scurrying of rats. Doors remain locked, windows boarded up. No one dares to step outside unless they are carrying another body to the mass grave at the edge of the village. Eleanor's father fell ill yesterday. She has stayed at his side, refusing to leave, despite the danger. I long to see her, to comfort her, but my father forbids it. He says I must stay away. And deep down, I know he's right. How did this happen? How did we go from a thriving village, a peaceful kingdom, to this nightmare? I fear it's only a matter of time before the plague takes us all. December 24th. Now, there are strange men wandering through the village, dressed in long dark robes. Their faces are hidden behind bird-like masks, crafted from black leather with long, curved beaks that seem to hold bundles of herbs or perfumes. They walk the streets in silence, their cloaks dragging in the mud, and every time they pass, the air grows thick with the scent of my mother's herbs, cloves, cinnamon, rosemary, but there's something darker underneath it all. It smells like decay, as though the very earth is rotting beneath us. They claim to be doctors, but I don't trust them. No, I don't think they're doctors at all. This revision builds on the sense of dread and the growing fear of the plague, while also emphasizing the mystery and tension surrounding the strange figures arriving in the village. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments. December 28th. Yesterday, I saw one of the doctors near the town square. His mask was thick with dust, his eyes hidden beneath dark, round lenses. He carried a long wooden stick, and when an old man, bent over with fever, tried to approach him, the doctor struck him across the back with it. The man cried out in pain, but the doctor didn't even look at him. He simply walked away, as though the old man was nothing more than a nuisance, leaving him stumbling in humiliation. Yet people still flock to these masked figures, as though they believe they hold the key to some miracle cure. But I cannot fathom why. Perhaps the villagers think the bird-faced men bring some remedy hidden beneath their masks. But they offer nothing, no potions, no healing herbs, no medicine of any kind. Instead, they bring only fear and cold commands. They stride through our streets like gods, untouchable, their masks of death a symbol of their power. But I have never seen them help anyone. All they do is slap their sticks on the ground, ordering the sick to stay away, yelling words in Latin that no one understands. "Stay back, filthy wretches!" they bark, pushing the desperate and the dying away as if we are all beneath them. I watched one of them last week. He entered the home of a woman I once knew, someone who had fallen victim to the plague. Her skin was swollen and black, her body already ravaged by the disease. I saw the doctor go inside, but when he emerged, he didn't even glance at her. He turned his head as if he hadn't seen her at all, barely acknowledging the house where she lay. Her body remained in that room for days before the village finally saw fit to bury her. January 5th. The villagers are growing more desperate. They have no choice but to believe in these masked figures. They say the doctors bring with them the air of life, whatever that means. But I believe it's nothing but a lie. These masked men are not healers. They are the cause of our suffering. I believe they carry the very sickness they claim to cure. With every step they take, they spread the plague, carrying poisons and perfumes that drift through the air, infecting anyone who comes near. I heard a rumor today, from Thomas. He overheard the village priest speaking to Father Edmund in hushed tones. They suspect the doctors are part of a greater conspiracy, hired by the king himself to cleanse the kingdom. They are here to break the people's spirits, to make them suffer until they submit. I cannot understand why the king would send such men to our homes, to our streets, and yet we are told to trust them. But I cannot. How can anyone trust them? January 8th. This morning, I saw one of the masked doctors standing outside our house. My father stood in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly across his chest, watching the doctor as he approached. The doctor was tall, his mask dark and sharp, looking like something straight out of a nightmare. His eyes were hidden behind the black lenses, unreadable, hollow. The doctor stopped in front of our house, then began to raise his stick, but my father stepped forward to block him. "You will not come near us," my father said, his voice firm but trembling. The doctor did not respond. He simply swung his stick at my father's leg, knocking him to the ground. I rushed to him, but the doctor raised the stick again, as if to threaten us further. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving us in the dirt as though we were nothing but pests beneath his boots. I helped my father to his feet, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He, too, knows that something is terribly wrong. January 12th. I cannot shake the feeling that these doctors have brought more than just sickness to our doorstep. They bring fear, they bring suspicion, and they sow distrust between us all. And I believe that, far from being the cure, they are the very ones spreading the plague. If they are the cause, how can we stop them? No one dares to defy them. They have power, they are untouchable. If the king has sent them, he must know more than we do about their true purpose. I can no longer watch my village crumble under their presence. The plague spreads faster with each passing day, and these doctors, these agents of death, walk among us, untouched. They are spreading more than just sickness. They are spreading despair. God help us. January 13th. I woke this morning to an unnatural silence, a stillness that seemed to press against me from all sides, like the fog creeping through the cracks of the window. I rose from my bed, a heavy weight of dread hanging in the air. The coldness of the room mirrored the emptiness in my chest. My family, once so full of life, now lay silent. I needed water. I needed to escape, if only for a moment. Perhaps the fresh air would clear my thoughts, make me forget for a while the sickness that had invaded not just this house, but the whole town, the world itself. I was gone but a short time. When I returned, everything had changed. The door to my house stood ajar, a small, ominous gap, and as I stepped inside, a stench of decay hit me like a slap. Death hung in the air. My stomach twisted with the nausea of it, and every instinct screamed that something was horribly wrong. I entered the kitchen and froze. There, standing in the center of the room, was one of them, the cursed man in the bird mask. He was bent over a table, and my heart sank as I realized what he was doing. Rats. Dozens of them. They scurried across the floor, propelled by his hands, his actions deliberate. He was releasing them into my home. Why? I managed, the word barely a whisper, my voice thick with disbelief. The doctor turned slowly, as if surprised to see me. His eyes, hidden behind the dark lenses, were empty, cold. Without a word, he reached for his stick and swung it at my chest. The blows sent me stumbling backward. Deus te oblivis est, he muttered, his voice as cold as the steel of his mask. The words felt like a death sentence, devoid of care, of humanity. I struggled to rise, but the pain was unbearable. Blood welled in my mouth. I barely raised my arms to defend myself before he struck again. When he left, I was left alone on the cold floor, bleeding. The rats had already begun their work, and I could do nothing but watch as they scurried about, marking the beginning of the end. The doctor, if that's what he truly was, had sealed our fate. With trembling hands I crawled back to my family. But by the time I reached them, it was already too late. My mother, my father, my sister, each of them lay in their beds, their skin darkened with boils, their bodies twisted in pain. Blood poured from their mouths, and they convulsed in their final moments. I could hear their labored breathing, the gurgling of their throats. My sister's body heaved with violent coughs, her face contorted in agony, blood splattering across her pale skin. I should have saved them. I could have, if only I'd been faster, braver, but it was too late. How could I touch them now? Their eyes, vacant, wide, unseeing, stared at me as I screamed for help that would never come. And then I heard it. Her voice. My love stood in the doorway, trembling, her hand reaching for mine. She was coughing, struggling for breath, but in her eyes there was still a flicker of the woman I had known. "We need to leave," she whispered, barely able to speak. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I wanted was to save her, but the sickness had already started its cruel march through her veins, through her lungs. Without thinking, we fled. We ran as far as we could, but it didn't matter. The village was falling. The plague had already claimed my family, my friends. We found a small, derelict house at the edge of the town, its walls sagging, the roof barely holding. We hid there, together, though deep down, I knew it was already too late. Her coughs grew more violent, blood staining the cloth she held to her lips. I clutched her hand, feeling the pulse slow, her breath growing more labored with every passing moment. I felt it too, the burning fever, the tightness in my chest.